the show we have Marguerite Guzman Bouvard. Welcome, Marguerite, to the show.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Her last book of poetry won the Mass Book Award for poetry, and the title of that book is The Unpredictability of Light. Marguerite has authored several books in wide-ranging areas, from political science to women and human rights to spirituality and poetry. She's written about dealing with chronic illness and grief, and she's also written a book about the invisible wounds of war, coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan from a political science perspective, I imagine.
Yes, yes.
So,
and also psychological, yes. Because I'm writing about the combat stress that soldiers come back with in the book.
It takes a long time for soldiers to feel that it's okay not to be okay. That's a different culture. That's another culture. It's not the military culture. And so they really don't provide the help that these soldiers need when they return. They come back from Iraq, they're still in Iraq. For instance, they're driving down the street where there used to be IEDs buried. They see a can, they get panicked, they say, this is going to blow up. They hear a noise, they get startled and upset. And most of us have good and bad memories. We can put our bad memories aside. Our soldiers can't. They dream about them. They hallucinate. All of the veterans I've interviewed, they close their door. They sleep with a gun under their pillow. They're still at risk. They work 24/7 in a group that is like a family.
So I want to start off today by asking you the question about some of your recollections on how you got started. So when you were a young girl, did you decide one day, I think I'm going to go into poli-sci or poetry?
I was just before the women's movement. You don't go into poetry and make a living, that is for sure. And I wanted to be an art historian because I love art, and I realized I couldn't get a job there. So I went into political science because I thought I could get a good job there. I wanted to work in the Foreign Office, and then I realized that women were not being hired there, and everything has changed. But I really loved studying political science, and I loved studying about world politics because I come from a European background. I grew up in a trilingual household. So.
Right, and would you mind telling us where that is, where you're
I'm
originally from?
Trieste, Italy, and when I first came to the office here in Wellesley to sign up to vote, they said, "Oh, is that in South America?" So it's in the north of Italy.
Did you know that this is sort of what you wanted to do from an early age?
No, I was in college and writing a paper, and in fact, even in high school when I wrote, my teachers said, "This is wonderful," but I wasn't interested. And I was in college and I wrote a paper, and the professor called me in and said, "This is really good writing." So then I decided to take a friend of mine who was an artist, and she did a cover, and we put together a magazine, the two of us. And then I was busy going to graduate school, and I went to graduate school when I was very young. I got married, I had kids, this, that, and the other thing. What really started me on the poetry was I got a grant from the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies, and I went to a poetry reading, and I thought, that's what's been in my head all my life. I'll write it. And that's how I got started at the Bunting Institute. It was then called the Bunting, and now it's the Radcliffe Institute, and that's how I started. And so I like writing in different areas because they inform each other. You know, I don't want the poetry to just be me, 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 but I consider myself a poet of the world.
So I was going through one of your poetry books, your latest one, The Unpredictability of Light, and I see that you go through quite a few countries. Would you mind telling us all the different countries you walk us through in this book?
Well, Germany, Italy. The most important one for me in this book is France, of course, and Iraq, because I was very concerned about the Iraq War and about the Iraqi population. And one of the poems is about an art museum and what happens to what really happened during the war to the Iraqi civilians. And I wanted, this just sort of fell out, I wanted people to know that the museums were disappearing, the libraries, that a lot of the culture was being harmed. So there's Iraq, Italy, Germany, I don't know what else, South America.
And when you write your poems, do you weave in cultural aspects from these different cultures and countries, or do you mention the countries by name?
I mention the countries by name. It's not in the book, but I just wrote one poem about a child that's in Syria, in Aleppo, and he's got a bandage on his head, and he's waiting to be admitted to a hospital. And so I imagined his story, and it started like, where was his mother?
Mm-hmm.
What happened to his father? Why is he sitting here? And I know that the streets in Syria, you can't walk them anymore because they're all, they're boulders. You can't walk across that. And I'm thinking, this child can't walk. His world has changed. So that's how I start. I see something, and I'm a very visual person. I see something, and I make a story out of what I see.
Did you ever visit those places, like recently, or
No,
the last time you were there?
I've never been to Iraq, but of course I've been to Germany, and I've been to
Right.
Italy and France
Right.
a lot. Yeah.
Right. That's very interesting. So let me ask you, how long does it take for you to complete one of your books on average, one of your poetry books versus the other kinds of works that you do?
Well, the poetry takes longer because I'm doing other things at the same time, and I need to be alone and to be quiet. And this is really important, and it's hard to do. I used to go to writers' retreats in Virginia, and I can't anymore because I have so many illnesses. But when we go away, my husband is French, and we have a tiny little apartment in the Alps. And since I'm not a walker, I have fibro, my husband hikes and hikes and hikes, and I'm alone in the apartment, and that's when I write poetry. So that's my retreat.
And so let me ask you, do you have any really interesting experiences that were scary or exceptional from your travels and your research and the writings that you do?
Yes. I was in Argentina, and I don't know why, I just had to do this book. I saw a newspaper article about the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo with their white scarves on, and I thought, I have to go and write about these women. I was just beginning to get ill. It was very dangerous because even though the junta fell and there was a president, Alfonsín, the security guards were there, the military was there, they had, in fact, anyway, I decided I'm going, and I'm going to interview them. And it wasn't easy because we had a connection with the junta diplomatically, and I used Liv Ullmann, whom nobody remembers, but she's a former movie star who worked on human rights. She got me to have them accept me. And before I left, I called my senator, and he said, "You're going at your own risk." A week before I left, there was an assassination attempt on the head of the Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo. And when I got there, I decided I'm not going to just interview them, I'm going to march with them. And that's what I did. And I got used to being followed by police. And I used to recognize a security guard. And I was there twice. The second time I left, there was a riot in the Plaza de Mayo. There were police all over with their guns. I took photos of them. I got mad, and I discovered what anger can do. There are two kinds of anger: anger that hurt, and anger that makes you leap and work for justice. So I got really angry, and I began to take photos of these guys.
It's a good thing you weren't caught.
You know, I didn't care. I was so focused on this, and these mothers were such amazing women. They got an international reputation. They were so smart. A lot of them hadn't gone to school, but they were smart, savvy politically. Some of them died. They were my heroines.
And they were marching for social justice?
Their children had been disappeared. And being disappeared meant that they wound up in 340 concentration camps and were tortured to death.
That's awful. And what was the name of the book that came out of this?
Revolutionizing Motherhood, The Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo.
Awesome. And that's available on Amazon.
Yes, it is.
Perfect.
It is.
That's a very interesting story. That must have been very scary. Scary experience.
The first year I was afraid, you know, you don't, for a woman being alone in Argentina at that time, it was not a good idea. I used to have my dinner sent up. And then I saw, this is not a waiter, this is a security guard. So I hid all the work I did at night. I was doing a lot of writing.
And where did you hide it?
Under the mattress. I don't know. So the next time I went, I didn't make a reservation. I told the cab driver, find me a tiny hotel in the business district that has 8 rooms. And he did. And I was safe. And I was safe.
So it was really the touristy hotels were more of a target.
They were very much of a target.
Rather than, something a little bit more low-key.
Yeah.
Well, that was very smart thinking.
And I wrote a book of poems about them. I took
wonderful.
photos of them. While I was there, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to work much longer, so I bought myself an expensive camera. I took photos of the mothers, and I even brought them to Brandeis.
And tell us the title of your poetry book that came out of that.
With the Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo. I don't think it's around anymore. I don't think you can get it, but
Well, I'm sure it's available on Amazon. Right?
I don't know.
I haven't yet come across a book that Amazon cannot deliver. So for our viewers, and tell us the name of that one more time.
With the Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo.
Perfect. And so today you've brought your latest book of poems, the one that won the Mass Book Award.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you'd read us one of your favorite poems from the book.
Okay. Shall I read you the one about a rock?
Oh, sure. Any one that you particularly like that that you love.
The title of the poem is taken from something that President Bush said, and it's called "We Are Making Progress."
This is the first Bush or the second Bush?
The second Bush
Second.
is George W. Bush Jr. He's the one that got us into Iraq because there were weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. We are making progress. Suddenly, the power goes out in the very last art gallery in Iraq. The temperature rises to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. There will be no exhibit today. Just a few artists have gathered. Those who have not fled. Nouri al-Rawi cries out, "I haven't picked up a paintbrush in 2 years. I want to burn my art history archives, rip my heart out." Hassan, the self-proclaimed curator of what remains, is one of the last to believe in tomorrow. There are no more hollowed spaces, golden domes, where hearts once soared are shattered. Neighborhoods and villages are shuffled like cards. A whole country in exile within its own borders. Here, even the clouds bleed.
Oh, that was lovely. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I believe you're working on another new book now.
Yes.
Will this be a book of poetry, or will it be on other topics?
2 actually. One is a book of poetry, and it's going to come out this year, and it's called "The Light That Shines Inside Us," and it's going to come out maybe next winter. And that's my world book, because I even go into Syria, and I write about soldiers who have been, our soldiers who have been in Iraq, and what happens to them. So, and I write about Somalia, and the children in Somalia, so it's my world book.
And here's a question for you for the viewers may be interested in. When you do research for your books, how do you track down people to interview in America when you're researching these topics?
Not for my poetry books, I don't, but for my other books, you know, I somehow, well, let me tell you how I started the book on the invisible wounds of war. I write in many areas, and I wrote a short story in a magazine, and I saw a poem that was written by a soldier that committed suicide, and I was stunned. So I asked the editor for his mother's address, and he said, "Nuh-uh, that's private. So I was after him and after him. I finally got it. I called her, talked to her, wrote an article about her. And that's how I got started. And bit by bit, I got to know this person, that person. That I was in touch with people around the country without ever leaving my desk because I can't travel around.
Right. And, that's a lot of famous people have done that, like Emily Dickinson, who wrote wonderful poetry without actually leaving her house.
Thank you. So that's how I did it, and I love interviewing people.
And when you write books that are across different disciplines, do you find it difficult to switch over from one genre to the next?
No. The most difficult is switching to poetry because it's the other side of your brain and it's the subconscious. But no, I love putting together different disciplines, which is not something that makes academia very happy, but I think it's important. When I was teaching political science, I became interested in psychology. I read a book that I loved on why people commit genocide because I was teaching about war. So you can't know just one thing. You need to know many different things to understand. And it's difficult to understand life.
Right. Well, that's a very interesting thought. When you write your poetry, do you start off by picking a theme and then working around that, or do you write a bunch of poems and then see how it fits together? What's your style of approaching it?
It's chaos. I'm pretty well organized in the nonfiction books, but it's something that I see. I saw this photo, what I wrote about the Syrian child, I saw his photo in the newspaper and it just broke my heart. So that's how I started with the image, and then I imagined the life, and I'm a mother and a grandmother. Why is this little boy who's only 8 sitting by himself waiting to be admitted? So from there I imagine that as everyone, I'm very interested in Syria, very interested in what's happening there. So I imagine his life, and so every poem is different, and I see if they stick together or not. I don't.
Right, right, interesting. And do you your next book that you're working on, is it almost done? Are you halfway through, or
the one on the next poetry?
The next poetry book. Right.
It's done.
What advice would you give fellow women about living in these times, in our times today?
Be informed. Get beyond your own life into another person's life and care. This is a society that is anti-immigrant. Learn to appreciate our diversity, and learning doesn't take place at school. It also takes place in how you approach life, in getting to know people that are not exactly like you, and getting to know other countries, and that's very, very important. Because I think that humanity is one and it's diverse, and we're here to honor and learn about and treasure our diversity.
And what would you say to, for example, Wellesley High School students, especially women who are looking to travel abroad by their senior year or before the end of their senior year? Because the world seems like sort of rife with dangerous places. I know it's probably always been like that,
Yes, it has.
But especially today.
Well, I tell them to read about the country that they go to and to be careful, and to do something about language, you know. I grew up trilingual. You know a lot of languages. Learning languages is important.
Because you feel that it's important to be able to communicate with other people.
Absolutely.
Do you feel that there are a lot of places still in the world where people don't speak English?
Oh yeah. Yes, they are. We're not the top country in the world. I think China's getting to be the top country in the world. There are a lot of places where people don't speak English.
So if someone wanted to travel to the Middle East?
I don't think that's a good idea. Not right now.
Right.
Not right now.
Especially being an American, I suppose.
Well, yes, and being a woman. That's a tough one. My niece, whom I adore and who was a dean at Simmons, was upset about what was happening in Iraq, and God bless her, she went to Jordan, wore a scarf, worked with the librarians to help them get online and to help save their libraries. That's not all she did. She brought 2 Iraqis to Simmons for their PhDs.
Oh, lovely. Wonderful.
So-
And is she also a political scientist like
No,
yourself?
she's into library science, and she's in very many different fields. Her main field is preservation and conservation, and that's why she was upset by what was happening in Iraq.
Well, let me ask you a question that's maybe a little bit off the path here. What we lately we've seen articles come out about this is, I think, the 50th year of feminism since the beginning of the feminist movement, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that and where you think women are today.
I'm a little concerned that women don't understand how much progress we've made and that some of them are going back. I'm concerned. I don't want to mention areas that are trying to put women down, but there's the issue of abortion, which is a personal and private addition. It's a decision that you make privately. There's a lot of there's a new book that came out. Everyone's excited by this top woman. Well, what about single moms who need jobs? They're the practical problems of the little people that somehow get passed by when we talk about feminism. But it's something we should celebrate because it's been a long time in coming. And when I went to graduate school at Harvard, I was 20, and there were 3 women. One was 30, one came from India, actually. There were 3 of us with all these men around, and it wasn't fun, to say the least.
That's interesting. Just to wrap up, give us other thoughts or other interesting stories that you might like to share about yourself, about your work, general thoughts.
Oh, I think a general thought about aging, because this is a society. I was listening to Garrison Keillor, and he's brilliant, funny, erudite, but he never stops making songs and making fun of older people. This is something that's wrong with our culture. And I'd like people to remember that older people have wisdom, they have experience, and they have stories, and we have a culture that lives in the presence. My grandmother grew up with us, and I learned history from her. She talked a lot and told me what she had been through. So I learned so much from her, and I think older women are especially important and not to be made fun of.
That's a very, very good point you make, especially because the older you are, you have a sense of history to share with the rest of us.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Marguerite. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today. I hope you'll come back and visit us again after the new book comes out.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
been my pleasure.